On my Instagram story, I actually posted a poll of different things that you guys wanted me to try, and I got a 97% like ratio for a Metallica tier list. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Keep in mind, all of these opinions are my own. If you guys think that you may have some different ideas or some different opinions, make sure to tell me in the comments. If I mess something up, make sure to tell me in the comments as well. And yeah, with that said, let's get right into it. So, I'm just going to quickly explain to you guys how a tier list works, just in case you haven't really had one or watched one yet. So, generally things are sorted into tiers, with that being S at the top, then A, then B, then C, then D. S is higher than A, S meaning it's the best, and D meaning it's the worst. So you can sort of say it's on a scale from greatest to least, S to D, that sort of thing. Okay, with that said, I think we should start with, I think, what everybody thinks is the unequivocal, undeniable worst album Metallica has ever made, and that is Master of No, it's not. It's Saint Anger. It's gonna go in the D tier. Um, I think Saint Anger has a lot to it. However, I think we'll start with the bad first, and then we'll get to the good. So, bad stuff about Saint Anger. Every song just feels way too long, in my opinion. I think, um, I mean, come on. I guess I should talk about the elephant in the room. The snare sounds like a trash can. Okay? It sounds like a literal trash can. I don't know what the producer was thinking. I don't know what Lars was thinking. I don't know what James was thinking. Um, that's like the worst choice ever. But there is something to be said about having such a bad snare noise, because that noise is more knowledgeable than thousands of bands' entire careers. So there's got to be something said for that. Down to the track selection, though, I think that Saint Anger, the title track, it's pretty good. I think Frantic definitely is underrated. If you've seen them play it live, I think Saint Anger as a whole is actually much, much better when it's being played live. And I think all of the riffs in Saint Anger are actually pretty good. Um, the C tuning on the guitar is a little bit weird, and I do have to say, no guitar solos in the entire album is really, really rough. I think it was a really bad direction to go in for the album. But one thing I do have to say, I think Lars's drumming in this is actually not that bad if everyone can get over the whole snare drum thing. Like, imagine if the snare was turned on. Lars's drumming would actually be pretty good. It would be repetitive, but it would be pretty good. But speaking of repetitive, the whole album feels very, very repetitive. There are some gems on there. I know a lot of people, myself included, really like the Unnamed Feeling. The harmonies throughout the entire album, the guitar harmonies, are pretty good. And I would say in general, the album has a lot of emotion and a lot of feel was put into the album, which I think is good. But honestly, it's really hard to get over the big three things: no guitar solos, trash can snare drum, and just really overall lack of quality in the album. So with that said, I think I'm gonna go with, what album do I want to rank next? I think I'm going to rank Load next, and I'm gonna put Load at C. The reason I put Load at C, there's a few songs on this album that I think are really, really fantastic songs. But the one thing I do have to say, the track list is alright. There's maybe three songs that I would give a pass to, that being probably 2x4, The Outlaw Torn, and King Nothing. Those three are generally Metallica's most well liked off of this album, and I think that goes for me too. I think every other song on this album, I don't know, it's pretty forgettable if I'm being completely honest with you guys. Um, but in general, I think coming off of the Black Album and then coming in to the later years and having something like Load be put out after the Black Album is really, really hard. Comparing Load to the Black Album is like comparing the Mona Lisa to a kid that literally just learned how to draw. It's pretty, pretty bad. However, that being said, I don't want to dunk on it too much because it is obviously way better than Saint Anger. We'll give it that. I think this album has definitely a lot of emotion put into it. I think the lyrics are fantastic. Hetfield's, honestly, he's a great vocalist. his lyric writing is beyond me. This album did falter a little bit in comparison to others, but I still think it's pretty good. The rhythm guitar section is great. It's just Load itself feels like dad rock instead of thrash metal, like their previous albums did. They did fix that obviously when Reload came out. We'll get to that in a second. Lars' drumming in this is pretty standard Lars drumming. It doesn't really sound all too remarkable, but it's definitely better than St. Anger's tone. Overall, the album was produced pretty well. Um, Kirk's solos are generally pretty good. They're pretty creative. Um, and I think, the guitars themselves could have been mixed a little bit better. I would have probably maybe just made them a little bit louder, honestly. Um, but yeah, and Jason's bass tone, of course, pretty good. Definitely not Justice level bass tone, so we'll give it that. But yeah, overall, I think the big three songs that I would say are really good: 2x4, Outlaw Torn, King Nothing, and yeah, I think that's why Loaded in C tier. Okay, moving on. I am gonna put. Let me think here. I think I'm going to put Hardwired in front of Load. This is a tough one, actually. I think I'm going to put Hardwired in B tier. So, Hardwired, coming off of an 8-year break from Death Magnetic, definitely had a lot of fans anticipating and waiting for the next album, just hoping that they would put something out. And when they released the single, Hardwired to Self-Destruct, I was only, I think, how old was I? I think I was 12 at the time. And I was just getting into Metallica at the time, and hearing this song come out after Saint Anger and Death Magnetic was honestly just like a breath of fresh air. Let me say that again. It was honestly just like a breath of fresh air for Metallica fans, I think. It was a return to their roots. It was fast. It was punchy. It was really, really well done. And then when the full album came out, there are great songs on this album overall. I think every song is worth mentioning except for a select few. I think Spit Out the Bone, phenomenal song. I've covered that one. Moth into Flame, I need to cover that one. That's really, really well done. Guitar harmonies are on point. And in general, Lars' drumming here, it was pretty tight, but I could definitely feel like there was a little bit of faltering, especially in the speed and in the fills that he's doing. But overall, still really, really well done. And I would like to say, Rob is very, very underrated on this album. I think that his bass tone is probably the best I've ever heard it, especially after Death Magnetic being a little bit overcompressed. Um, and overall, I think there's a lot of really good songs here. There's Murder One. There is Now That We're Dead. There's Halo on Fire. All of these songs are really, really well done. But at the same time, it almost felt like a stock Metallica album. And you'll see what I mean when I say stock Metallica album as we move through. But in general, I think this album, really well made, definitely needs to get played a little bit more at their live concerts instead of just playing the old stuff, in my opinion. But of course, nowhere on the level of Master of Puppets, but just a solid Metallica album that gave fans what they wanted and brought back some new music to the Metallica scene. Alright, next up, we're gonna cover, I think we'll cover Reload, and I'm gonna put Reload just in front of Hardwired. I think Reload is a great album, and it has a really good title track, that being Fuel. However, it's just not done properly. There are a lot of songs on here. There's Fuel, there's The Memory Remains, which I think is honestly a pretty goofy song because James's voice is just all over the place. It sounds a little bit whiny in certain sections, but of course, there's Fixer, there's Fuel, Memory Remains. There's a few more. There's definitely, The Devil's Dance. There's The Unforgiven 2. All of these songs are really, really well done. First off, I'm going to say James's voice sounded a little bit whiny. It was definitely raspier than a few others. But in general, I think the lyrics were good, and it was just sort of, a sort of slight improvement over Load's vocals. Rhythm guitars are solid as always. I have no complaints there. The tone is really good. And I definitely think Kirk's solos could have been done a little bit louder, a little bit more punchy. But in general, Kirk's solos are really, really well done here. I think he definitely made a little bit less use of speed than previous albums, but all in all, perfect. The one thing I have to say, to Lars in this album. His drumming is just so good on certain songs, like, you know, Fixer or The Memory Remains or Fuel. I know I'm repeating these songs a lot, but there's a reason for it. Those songs are the best ones on this album. Other songs like Devil's Dance, for example, just don't feel as memorable. And I think Lars' drumming has a big part in that. I think his drumming was very, very good in certain songs, but really lacked in others. There's speed changes, there's tempo changes, there's time signature changes, but it just doesn't feel as full and as magnified as I would like it to be. But with that said, the last album that I'm going to put in B tier is going to be none other than 72 Seasons. Now, one thing I have to say about 72 Seasons. I was in university when this came out. I was just starting finals, like final exams. And having this come out the day before my math exam was the most ridiculous thing ever. I was listening to this and studying at the same time. But anyway, the first track, the single Lux Eterna, came out, I think, in November. When I first heard it, I thought this was going to be a Hardwired 2.0 kind of album. The tone sounded exactly the same. And I challenge you guys, go listen to Hardwired, go listen to 72 Seasons, and tell me if you can find a difference. Like, legitimately tell me if you can find a difference. Because the production and the sound of both albums almost sound the exact same. The reason I put 72 Seasons above Reload and above Hardwired is three things. Number one, I think that James's voice has not sounded this good probably since 2008 in Death Magnetic. I think this was really, really well done, and I think it was better than Reload. I know that might be a hot take, but I think it's definitely better than Reload. I think that there's a lot to be discussed, especially for certain songs like Too Far Gone, Shadows Follow, the title track 72 Seasons, and I know they haven't played this live yet as I'm recording this, but Inamorata as well. All of those songs really hit hard, especially Inamorata. I know a lot of people say that every song on this album is too long. The intros are too long, the guitar solos aren't complex enough, and I get that. The song intros are pretty damn long, especially Shadows Follow. You don't even get into the real song for at least a minute. However, with that being said, I think the guitars in this album specifically, especially the rhythm, I know I'm repeating myself a lot, but James's rhythm guitars, they just hit right. And Kirk's solos in this album, I actually think are pretty good. There are certain solos, of course, he could have been a little bit more creative. Lux Eterna's solo got absolutely dunked on, and rightfully so. There was definitely a little bit missing there, in my opinion. However, I also think that Kirk does not get enough credit for being able to lead the rest of the song going forwards. His guitar tone is really, really well done. I think it stands out a lot better than the rest of the albums that I've mentioned so far. And the final thing is Lars' drumming. He does not get enough credit. None of the artists get enough credit. Not Rob, Kirk, James, Lars. None of them get enough credit for being able to play this fast for this long, both live and on this album. This fast for this long at almost 60 years old for all of them. Like, this is a serious accomplishment to be able to play this fast and still make really, really good music at this age. And I think there's got to be an entirely separate video, honestly, on how Metallica's just aged like fine wine. And this is just another album, 7 years in the making, gave Metallica fans what they wanted, and honestly, it sounded very, very good. And it was really nice to hear something new and a lot more full of emotion and full of power than something like Hardwired was compared to 72 Seasons. 72 Seasons clears it by far. With that said, B, C, and D tier are all done. And I know you guys are thinking, what the hell is Death Magnetic doing there? What the hell is Kill 'Em All doing there still, possibly? You might be thinking a couple of these things. Worry no more. I'm going to explain to you right now. Death Magnetic goes in A tier. And I know you guys are probably thinking, wow, this guy must be on something. This is the worst tier list I've ever seen in my entire life. Listen up. This album is the most underrated Metallica album I've ever listened to. Every song on this album is unskippable in my opinion. Every song. And I mean it. The only issue I have, first off, with the production quality, I said earlier, it's pretty overcompressed. This album just generally has a lot to work on. I know it's produced by Rick Rubin, everybody's sort of, messiah of producers, but this is really just, it's an unfortunate mix of bad production quality and just an overall, it feels almost lack of care for how the sound of every single instrument is flowing within the album. That being said, the guitar solos in this album are unbelievable. I need you guys to go listen right now. That Was Just Your Life, The Day That Never Comes, All Nightmare Long, The Judas Kiss. All four of those songs have, oh, they're just such good guitar solos. And there has to be something to be said for the riffs that James wrote in these songs. One thing I did notice actually as I was trying to learn some of these myself after listening to it on vinyl, James actually uses the exact same notes in That Was Just Your Life as he did on Enter Sandman, which is pretty ridiculous that I found that out within a first two, maybe three playthroughs of listening to the song. However, it makes the song sound phenomenal. And each song after That Was Just Your Life just feels like it builds, and builds, and builds on something that is just unmatched by Metallica since the Black Album, in my opinion. The End of the Line, solid track, has a really good riff, doesn't get repetitive at all. That's one thing that I can say. In contrast to 72 Seasons, Death Magnetic mixes it up a lot. They got a lot of new different time changes, a lot of new different guitar riffs, a lot of new different drum track parts. It's really, really well done. And I do have to say, Lars's drumming here, I know it was almost 15 years ago now, I think, but Lars's drumming here, 15 years younger than he is right now, he sounds just as good as he did back in Justice. It sounds amazing. There's no double kick hit that sounds late or too fast or too slow. There's no fill that sounds super rushed or, sloppy. And there's no part in the album where I can say, wow, Lars is sort of messing things up here or messing things up there. Every single part of this album, I think Lars played perfectly. One thing I do have to say, Kirk's solos, a little bit rough around the edges. You can hear a little bit in All Nightmare Long. There are certain bends on certain strings. They don't line up too well. Not a huge deal at all, of course. I still love the songs. It's just a little nitpick of mine. And one thing that I do have to say, James's voice sounds really, really good, but because of the overcompression of the album, it sort of sounds squished together with everybody else's tone, and everybody else's tone being on the exact same volume and the exact same part of the song, it just sounds a little bit off. That being said, this album and every other album you see that hasn't been ranked yet is a no-skip album. I strongly, strongly suggest to you guys, go and listen to this in one sitting, full on. Every song, even long ones like Suicide and Redemption and My Apocalypse at the very end. By the way, Kirk did phenomenal job on that My Apocalypse bridge riff. But anyway, Suicide and Redemption, super long, still worth the listen in my opinion. I think this album is super underrated, and you guys need to give it a try. And I'm going to be posting one very soon, or maybe it might already be up, depending on when this video comes out. That being said, I think I might have rambled a little bit too long for that one, so we're going to go into the next one. Kill 'Em All might be a controversial choice. This is in A tier. It's definitely not below Death Magnetic. It's way higher than Death Magnetic, but I just can't put it in S tier when you look at the rest of the albums that are in the bottom left there. So, Kill 'Em All has some of the best riffs I've heard in the thrash metal genre as a whole. Jump Into the Fire, it is written by Dave Mustaine, but regardless, Metallica did play it. They have it on their album. I think that riff is phenomenal. Metal Militia is a really, really good song. Hit the Lights. Metallica started so many concerts with that, I can't even count it. And for good reason. It has one of the best intros to an album, possibly in their entire discography, barring maybe, obviously, Enter Sandman. And I think there's a couple of good songs on there. Phantom Lord, No Remorse, The Four Horsemen, of course, you can't forget that. All of the songs have really, really good tone. The one thing I do have to say, this album needs a little bit more guitar tone, and James's voice has way too much reverb on it. Obviously, you can't control for that. It's 1983. They don't have nearly the same recording studios and equipment as they do now. it's just a little nitpick that I have because, Kill 'Em All, it's a great album. It's just the production quality kind of hits it down from S tier to A tier, in my opinion. Lars's drumming here sounds great. They were playing this all without a metronome, so I don't really fault him if there's a little bit of variation here and a little bit of variation there. I think Kirk plays every solo perfectly fine. I think James's voice is really, really good. He didn't really lean into that raspiness of his voice quite yet when this album came out, but nonetheless, really, really well done. And of course, rhythm guitars are really, really steady, palm mutes are on point, and I think in general this album is flowing really, really well. It's a no skip. Every single song on this album hits the right spot, and you can't deny it because it's Kill 'Em All, and this is Metallica's debut album, and man, did they knock it out of the park with that one. Now, the rest of these 4 albums are all S tier albums. So before I continue with this, I gotta ask you guys, subscribe, like, and tell me if you think that this tier list is doing just as well as your expectations thought, or maybe a little bit worse, maybe a little bit better. Let me know. With that said, let's get on to it. The next album that I'm gonna put in S tier is Ride the Lightning. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. How is Ride the Lightning below the Black Album and Master of Puppets and Justice? How is that possible? Think about it this way. This album came out right after Kill 'Em All. It's a huge improvement, and it only came out 1 year after Kill 'Em All came out. That being said, James's voice wasn't at the raspy voice that we know right now and even started to come into play during Master of Puppets. And one thing I do have to say, coming in right after Kill 'Em All, only being 1 year after their debut album, I honestly would have thought they would have taken a little bit more time with it. I know probably a sort of young person critique, why didn't they spend more time on this album? But I still think that they should have spent a little bit more time on it because you can clearly see in the production quality, it didn't really get too much better than Kill 'Em All other than James's voice not being as reverby. I know a lot of people will harp on me for that one. They think Ride the Lightning's tone is great. I'm not denying it. I think the guitar tone is perfect, and I think the drums have sounded really, really good. It just doesn't get up to the same standard of production that something like the Black Album and Master of Puppets does. And in general, I think that the production quality of this album is alright. It's just not on par with the other 2 albums that I just mentioned. That being said, James's voice, not as raspy as we saw. However, it's full of power. It's full of emotion. Every single song sounds amazing. Creeping Death, awesome. Fight Fire with Fire, probably the best we've heard James since the Kill 'Em All album came out and right afterwards. That improvement is really, really well done there. There's an instrumental, of course, Call of Cthulhu, really well done. Not my personal favorite, but I can definitely understand the appeal. The technicality is there, the melody is there, the flow is there. It's all really well done. Trapped Under Ice is really great. Escape is heavily, heavily underrated. You guys need to go listen to Escape right now. And obviously, you cannot forget the ballad of the album, Fade to Black. Great song, smack in the middle of the album, calms you down after a lot of faster songs like Fight Fire with Fire coming in before it. And in general, I think that the album is really well done. Lars's drums are really good. Again, not playing with a metronome, so I can't fault him for that one. With a little bit of melody and a little bit of tempo, maybe going in and out. Not a huge deal to me. It's 84. It's not a huge problem. Kirk's solos honestly might be the best solos in Metallica's entire discography. I'm willing to say that. Other than Justice and Master of Puppets, these are the best solos Kirk's ever done, in my opinion. And I think James's rhythm guitars are super on point. There are certain stops and time signatures that really catch you off guard, and I think it makes the album what it is. It's Ride the Lightning. It's in their top 4. It could arguably be in the top 3 even, depending on your personal preference, but I think it goes 4th. Now, I know you might be thinking, wow, this is a really hard choice between these 3. I actually think it's pretty clear-cut from this point on, so bear with me. 3rd place on the entire Metallica discography is going to the Black Album. Now, the Black Album, obviously very controversial in terms of what Metallica fans thought at the time. There were a lot of casual fans that were brought into the Metallica spectrum and the whole, spotlight. But there were a lot of hardcore Metallica fans coming off of Justice. They thought they would be getting something even more technical, even more fast, even more powerful. And instead they got the Black Album, which is a little bit more groovy, a little bit more, enthusiastic, but it wasn't as, progressive and as technical as Justice was. And I can understand where that problem lies. However, this album has the best sound quality of any Metallica album, period. There is no contest about this. Every single drum hit is perfectly pronounced. The guitar tones are really, really well balanced. James's voice sounds impeccable. I think there's absolutely no other album that can beat James's voice here. It's at the perfect tone, the perfect part, and I think every song in this album it's a gem. Again, another no-skip album by Metallica. It's unbelievable. There's Enter Sandman, of course. Nothing Else Matters, Sad But True, The God That Failed, Of Wolf and Man, My Friend of Misery, The Struggle Within, Holier Than Thou. The list goes on and on and on. Well, it only goes on for 12 songs, but don't worry about it. This album is an S tier because it hit me really hard as a kid hearing Enter Sandman for the first time. It's mind-blowing. Sad But True, super, super heavy for someone who's just getting into it. And even older fans can appreciate the slow, hard-hitting song that Sad But True is. And I think that there are certain songs that are really underrated. My Friend of Misery, The Struggle Within, both of those are really, really underrated, I think, on this album. Through the Never is my personal favorite on the album. I think they need to play that a hell of a lot more. I've learned it on guitar, bass, drums sooner or later. It's really, really, really well done. It sounds really groovy, and it gets you in the mood to sort of, get up, start moshing, get into the live concert, if you were at a live concert. That being said, there are a few nitpicks of mine. It's 1991 now, and Lars is still sort of on top of the beat or behind the beat in certain sections of each song, especially for something like Of Wolf and Man. I noticed there were a lot of fills that were a little bit fast, a little bit slow. That might be the style he's going for. I'm not sure. I don't know him. But again, that's just my opinion. In general, the rest of the song is drummed very well. The toms are really, really loud and emphatic, and I think that the snare noise is really well done. Personally, I would have liked it a little bit tighter, but that's just me. Kirk's solos are iconic in this album. Enter Sandman's solo, you cannot forget it. It's the easiest solo to remember out of the entire album, and in general, I think the lead guitar in this album is perfectly done. There are even little guitar licks and fills that you can sort of hear coming in, especially on something like, Sad But True, and Holier Than Thou, and Through the Never. Again, every song that I'm sort of repeating myself over and over again. Kirk's solos are amazing. James's voice has never sounded better. The rhythm guitar is anchoring the entire band's movement, the entire band's tempo, the flow, the sound. It's just really, really well done. And I think the Black Album, although it might be a little bit of a controversial pick, does go at number 3, just for those reasons alone. I think this is Metallica's, not magnum opus, but definitely in their top 3 greatest albums, and honestly might be one of the most iconic thrash metal albums of the 90s, or even in the genre as a whole. Moving on. This is going to be my personal favorite album, Justice. Justice is going in at number 2. At the S tier, and I know you can see it in the bottom left. It's right there. Master of Puppets is number 1, but we'll get to that in a second. Justice, the most technical, the most progressive, the possibly most advanced we've ever seen Metallica to this day. Every song in this album is a killer. Blackened has, honestly, a solo that matches up and is almost as iconic as Enter Sandman. And Justice for All, really, really good intro. The riffs are awesome. Eye of the Beholder, how can you forget that guitar lick? It's really, really well done. Try and cue it right here, if you can. But yeah, it's really, really well done. And in general, the track list, I mean, think about it. Every single song of this album, if I named it, you would know it. There's Blackened, there's Justice, there's Eye of the Beholder, there's Shortest Straw, there's Harvester of Sorrow, To Live Is To Die, Frayed Ends of Sanity, Dyer's Eve. Every song on this album is iconic, it's memorable, and in general needs to be played a lot more at their live concerts. I know maybe Lars can't keep up with it anymore, I don't know. But I think that every single song of this album is worth playing. My personal favorite in Metallica's entire discography right now. And even with the songs in general, I think I can play every song on this album except for Dyer's Eve. Still working on that one, of course. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty, the production. The production of this album. I know Jason said in multiple interviews he thinks it's hazing by James and Lars. I don't think that's the case. I think it was generally just a case of really bad production. James and Lars have voiced their concerns too. But let's address the elephant in the room. There is no bass on this album. It's nowhere to be found. It's gone. It's disappeared. It's vanished. Nobody can figure out where it's gone. And that is honestly the number one thing that I have to knock this album for. There's no bass. It feels not empty per se, but it feels a lot less full than it would have when there is bass. And you can see a lot of different bassists on YouTube just add their bass into it, and it sounds phenomenal. I think that needs to be, even their remaster, they didn't quite fix it, so they should try and fix it if they ever release it again. But I digress. Besides that bass section, it's the whole album, but besides that sort of bass portion, I think that this album is, like I said, the most technical. Lars's drumming is so underrated on this album. Every single time signature is perfectly timed with James's rhythm guitar, and I think it adds a lot to the songs. Everything is layered little by little. I think Frayed Ends of Sanity, I mean, come on. Those time signatures are unbelievable. Every single riff, every fill, every lick on the guitars, it's just perfectly planned out, really well done. And even on a song like Justice or Blackened, each fill, it's right there, it's perfect, and it's iconic. Kirk's solos, honestly, I can't say that they're better than Master of Puppets or better than the Black Album, but they're definitely the most technical. They're definitely the most skill show-off sort of solos. They give you a sense of what Kirk is all about. He's got super fast hands. He's got super technical rhythms and fills and different things that he can do in each song. And I think it makes the album flow really, really well. I think James's voice here, I think it might be part of the mix. It doesn't actually sound as raspy as Master of Puppets, for example. I still think that it needs a little bit of work in that respect. However, it's a really good anchor, and you cannot deny the fact that James carried this album on his back with those rhythm guitar anchorings, man. Especially in Frayed Ends of Sanity. I know I'm talking about that song a lot. My personal favorite, I kind of have to talk about it a little bit more. But, especially in Kirk's guitar solo section, when they're playing that song live, James literally anchors Lars's drums. Lars is looking at James and saying, cue me in, make sure to cue me in. Because James is the anchor of the entire song. And I feel like that goes for every song. Dyer's Eve, really, really well played. Lars can't play it anymore, I don't think. He hasn't played it in a long time. But James's guitars are on point. You cannot deny the fact that Kirk's solos are insane. And the fact that James can even sing any of these songs without missing a beat on the rhythm guitar is just, it's unfathomable to me. I think that it's arguably Metallica's magnum opus in terms of technicality and in terms of musicality and composition. I think this album is beautifully composed. You can't skip it, and if you haven't listened to it yet, listen to the entire thing right now. Right now. And, with that said, we have made it to the final album. I think everyone saw this coming right from the beginning, but it's gotta be Master of Puppets. Now, with Master of Puppets, there's a few things to cut into before I can start praising this album like it's the next coming of the Messiah, the Leper Messiah. But, Master of Puppets, there's one issue that I have with the entire album, and it's that Damage Incorporated needs to be played more than once. That song is so underrated on this album. I think that Kirk's solos on this song are, they hit the spot. They're really, really well done. I think Lars's drums on this album is the best drumming he's ever done, hands down, except for maybe a few songs on Justice. This album, with Cliff's bass, I mean, come on. Cliff, honestly, might be the best bassist in all of metal. I think that the instrumental, Orion, that's his magnum opus, unless you count Anesthesia Pulling Teeth on Kill 'Em All, which I think you should. That's a killer solo. But Orion in general feels a lot fuller. It brings the entire Master of Puppets album, it brings it full circle. I think it's really, really well made. Of course, you can't miss every track on the song. Sorry, you can't skip any track on this album. There's Battery, Master of Puppets, Leper Messiah, Disposable Heroes, Sanitarium, The Thing That Should Not Be, Damage Incorporated, Orion. Every single song I'm mentioning here. You can't skip it. It's amazing. James's voice sounds at its peak right here. Lars's drums, the mix on Lars's drums is really, really well done. The tom hits are right on point. The kick sounds like a click, but that style wasn't actually brought in until a lot later in 1991 with their Black album. So here it's actually, it feels like this album has aged to the point where it can be played in 2023 and sound like it was produced and mastered and mixed in 2023. It's a really, really well done album. Metallica's magnum opus, you can't argue with that. And in general, every song on that album, unmatched, unbelievable. Disposable Heroes, that solo is amazing. Harp on it all you want for having a million zeros on the E string on the guitar. I know it's really hard to get over, but I still think it's a great song. The Thing That Should Not Be, outstanding time signatures, really, really good fills. I think Lars's drums actually complement the guitars really well in this section. And of course, I'm going to sort of round out this album by saying Master of Puppets has got to be the most iconic song in all of metal. You cannot mistake this song for anything else other than the greatest metal song of all time. Even though it was sort of brought in with Stranger Things and that whole Eddie Munson debacle, I know a lot of Metallica fans really didn't like that. Personally, I didn't love it either. It wasn't the greatest look for them, especially towards their more hardcore fans. That being said, though, I do think that it did a really good job of bringing in more people to the metal scene and getting people into Metallica again, sort of getting them ready for 72 Seasons that was coming out. Obviously, they didn't know it was coming out yet, but regardless, it was still coming into 72 Seasons and sort of giving them an introduction. And all in all, I think that Metallica hit their peak with Master of Puppets, and they can hit an even higher peak on their next album after 72 Seasons if they just do the correct things. They need to have really good guitar harmonies. They need to have really good guitar riffs. James's voice needs to be on point. Lars's drums need to be on point. And honestly, I didn't really talk about the bass too much for any of these albums, but in general, Rob, Cliff, and Jason have all been super, super steady bassists for Metallica. And you can see, even in the auditions for Rob, you can tell Metallica just vibed with him. There was a really, really good vibe when Rob came up to the entire group and started just jamming. He played Battery at the audition, I believe. That was honestly just a really good show of what he can do, what he brings to Metallica, and how the bass really rounds out the album. But with that said, thank you very much for watching, guys, and I hope to see you in the next video. Make sure to like, subscribe, and this is GhostFace. Peace out.